They told us we were filthy long before we ever believed it. The water dripped from a cracked pipe into a metal basin, one slow drop at a time, each sound echoing through the whitewashed intake hall, like a clock counting something no one wanted to measure. It was April 1945, near the Rhine, in a temporary Allied processing center set up inside what had once been a textile warehouse, its tall windows now scrubbed clean, its brick walls smelling faintly of lime and disinfectant. Outside, the war was collapsing into paperwork and trains and lists of names. Inside, 32 German women stood in a straight line beneath electric lights that hummed overhead, their boots leaving faint dust prints on a concrete floor still damp from mopping. They had been transported 2 days earlier in the back of a military truck, wrapped in issued blankets, given hot soup, registered by name. Now they waited for the next instruction. Anna Keller stood forth from the end. She was 22 years old, 5'5", weighing just under 100 pounds. Before the war, she had apprenticed in a bookshop in Cologne, shelving poetry in careful alphabetical order. Now her hair had been cut short for sanitation, her wrists thin as broom handles, her posture rigid not from defiance, but from habit. A U.S. Army sergeant read from a clipboard near the door, while 2 American nurses in pressed white uniforms moved between folding tables stacked with fresh clothing. Cotton dresses, undergarments, stockings, simple leather shoes in measured sizes. Steam drifted from behind a canvas partition where portable bathing tubs had been filled with warm water hauled in by enlisted men an hour earlier. The instructions were clear. You will change into clean garments. Personal effects will be bagged and returned after inspection. The words were translated into German by a young corporal whose accent bent the syllables but carried the meaning. The women did not move. Not one reached for the folded clothing. Not one stepped toward the steam. Anna felt the heat of the room against her face, smelled soap she had not encountered in months, and tightened her hands at her sides. She kept her eyes on the floor. Around her, the others did the same. The sergeant glanced up from his clipboard. "Go ahead," he said, tapping the paper lightly as if the gesture alone might start them. "Forward." Silence answered him. A chair scraped somewhere in the hall. A truck backfired outside. The water kept dripping. The corporal translated again, slower this time. "You may change now." Still no one moved. Margaret Collins, 34, registered nurse from Des Moines, Iowa, had worked 12-hour shifts for 3 straight weeks processing displaced civilians and prisoners of war. She stood near the bathing tubs, sleeves rolled precisely 2 inches above her wrists, observing the line without speaking. She noticed details before she formed opinions. The way the women's shoulders curved inward. The way several pressed their arms tight against their sides as though taking up less space might make them less visible. She noticed Anna's hands trembling almost imperceptibly. The sergeant's patience thinned. "We don't have all day," he muttered, though his voice held more fatigue than anger. "Tell them it's standard procedure." The corporal relayed the message. A murmur traveled down the line, soft as wind across dry grass. Anna felt something tighten in her throat. She swallowed once. Then she lifted her head just enough for her voice to carry. "We are unclean," she said in careful English, each word shaped slowly. The sentence did not rise in pitch. It did not challenge. It simply settled into the room. A few of the other women nodded faintly, as if confirming a fact already understood. The corporal hesitated before translating the rest of what Anna added in German. "We should not touch clean things." The sergeant frowned, misunderstanding first. "No one said you couldn't," he replied briskly. "That's the point. These are for you." But Margaret did not look at the clothing. She looked at Anna's face. The young woman's chin was lifted now, but her eyes were not defiant. They were fixed somewhere just beyond the nurse's shoulder, as if searching for a rule still in force. Margaret stepped forward, her shoes making a soft, steady sound against the floor. "What do you mean?" she asked, her tone even. The corporal translated. Anna's hands tightened further. "We have not been proper," she said, searching for the word. "We are not fit." The sentence hung unfinished. No one in the room laughed. No one scolded. The sergeant shifted his weight, impatient with what sounded like superstition. "They're prisoners, not porcelain," he muttered under his breath. Margaret heard him, but did not respond. Instead, she studied the women again, noticing faint discolorations on cuffs, dirt embedded beneath fingernails, the stiffness that comes from weeks without privacy. She understood something the clipboard did not record. The refusal was not rebellion. It was shame rehearsed until it felt like law. Margaret reached up and removed her white cotton gloves, folding them neatly and placing them on the nearest table. The movement drew several pairs of eyes. She stepped closer to Anna, stopping 2 feet away, close enough for warmth to register, but not so close as to crowd her. "Look at me," she said gently. The corporal translated. Anna hesitated before lifting her gaze. Their eyes met under the electric light. Margaret did not flinch. She did not inspect. She simply held the look, steady and unhurried. "You are not unclean," Margaret said. The translation followed. Anna's brow tightened slightly, not convinced. Margaret nodded once toward the steaming tubs. "The water is for comfort, not correction," she added. Around them, the room remained still. The sergeant exhaled sharply but did not interrupt. Margaret bent and picked up one of the folded dresses, simple blue cotton with short sleeves, holding it at chest height. She did not extend it forward yet. "These are not rewards," she said. "They are ordinary." The words sounded almost radical in the sterile hall. Ordinary. She set the dress back down and took one small step backward, widening the space between them. "We will begin again," she said quietly. The corporal translated, his voice softer now. The dripping water continued, steady as breath. No orders followed. No one rushed the moment. The line of women stood suspended between instruction and permission, the steam curling gently upward like something patient. Margaret waited, hands relaxed at her sides, as if time itself could bend toward dignity if given enough room. Anna felt the warmth of the room settle into her bones. She glanced once at the tub, then back at the nurse who had removed her gloves and lowered her voice. The word ordinary echoed in her mind, unfamiliar but not unwelcome. The water dripped again. Somewhere outside, a train whistle sounded faintly across the river, long and low, carrying with it the sense that something was ending and something else, not yet named, was about to begin. The steam continued to rise in thin ribbons, softening the hard edges of the intake hall, and for several long seconds no one crossed the invisible line between refusal and trust. Anna felt the weight of 31 pairs of eyes resting somewhere near her shoulders, not pushing, not pleading, simply waiting to see what she would do. She had spoken first. That meant something, even now. Margaret Collins did not move closer again. She did not repeat herself. She simply stood without gloves, hands bare, as though removing that thin layer of cotton had altered the balance of the room. The sergeant shifted his stance, the leather of his boots creaking faintly, but he said nothing. The authority in the room had changed shape without anyone announcing it. Anna inhaled slowly. The air smelled of soap and warm metal, and something unfamiliar that she later realized was clean cotton heated by steam. She glanced at the nearest tub. The water surface trembled from the drip that still echoed from the cracked pipe overhead. It was not the water that frightened her. It was the permission. For months, cleanliness had not belonged to her. It had been something distant, something reserved for other people in other rooms. To step toward it felt like stepping into a place she had not earned. Beside her, a woman named Liesel shifted her weight. Liesel had been a schoolteacher before the war, her hair once worn in a thick braid down her back. Now it barely brushed her collar. Liesel leaned slightly toward Anna and whispered in German, asking if the nurse meant what she said. Anna did not answer at once. She kept her eyes on Margaret, searching for signs of impatience, for the tightening jaw that would signal disappointment. There was none. Margaret nodded once, a small gesture that did not demand obedience. Anna lifted one foot, then set it down again, as if testing the floor for stability. The concrete was solid. The world did not shift. Slowly, she stepped out of the line. The movement was so slight that it almost went unnoticed, but the women behind her felt it like a change in wind. The corporal drew a quiet breath. The sergeant lowered his clipboard to his side. Anna walked toward the nearest tub, counting her steps without meaning to. 1, 2, 3, 4. She stopped at the edge of the steam and looked at the folded towel resting on a metal stool. It was white, too white. She hesitated, hands hovering in. Midair. Margaret moved then, not to hurry her, but to lift the towel and shake it once, letting it unfold naturally before placing it back down. The gesture transformed it from an object of ceremony into something ordinary again. Anna reached for the edge of the tub, and felt warmth seep into her fingers. The sensation startled her. Warmth without demand. She closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself, then turned slightly toward the nurse. Margaret stepped aside, granting privacy without turning her back completely. The other women watched in silence. Anna removed her worn outer layer carefully, folding it with the same precision she once used to shelve books in Cologne. She placed it on the bench, not discarding it, simply setting it down. Then she stepped into the water. The first contact made her inhale sharply. It was not pain. It was relief so unfamiliar that it felt almost sharp. The warmth wrapped around her calves, then her knees, then higher as she lowered herself slowly into the tub. The room remained quiet except for the drip and the faint hum of electric lights. Margaret picked up a bar of soap and held it out, not pressing it into Anna's hand, but offering it at a distance she could bridge herself. Anna reached for it. The soap was smooth, firm, solid in a way that made her throat tighten unexpectedly. She began to wash her arms in deliberate motions, as if relearning a language. The dirt lifted in faint swirls, disappearing into cloudy water that did not judge her for entering it. Across the room, Liesel stepped forward next. Then another woman. The line dissolved not in disorder but in sequence, each choosing her moment without being called. The sergeant watched, expression unreadable, and finally turned toward the corporal. "Make a note," he said quietly. "They are cooperating." But the word cooperation felt insufficient for what was happening. Margaret moved among the tubs with steady rhythm, replenishing warm water when needed, handing towels without ceremony, speaking only when spoken to. At one point Anna looked up and found the nurse still there, not supervising, not measuring, simply present. "Why?" Anna asked softly in English, the word barely audible over the water. Margaret considered before answering. "Because you are here," she said. The simplicity of it left no room for argument. Anna lowered her gaze again and continued. Washing, this time slower, not from hesitation but from attention. When she finished, she rose carefully, water dripping from her shoulders onto the concrete floor. Margaret handed her the towel, and Anna accepted it without lowering her eyes. She dried herself methodically, then reached for the blue cotton dress. The fabric felt light against her palms. She held it up briefly, as if confirming its weight, then slipped it over her head. The material settled along her frame, simple and unadorned. It did not transform her. It did not erase what had come before, but it fit. When she stepped away from the tub, she stood a fraction taller than before. The difference was subtle, visible only in the alignment of her shoulders and the steadiness of her breathing. One by one, the other women completed the same quiet ritual. Steam filled the hall more fully now, softening the harshness of brick and metal into something almost gentle. The cracked pipe continued its slow count, but the sound no longer echoed alone. It mingled with water poured from pitchers, with the rustle of clean cotton unfolding, with the low murmur of voices no longer strained by shame. Margaret retrieved her gloves from the table, but did not put them on immediately. She looked at the row of women now dressed in simple blue and gray, hair damp, faces no longer guarded in the same way. They were still prisoners. The war had not ended inside these walls. But something had shifted, something invisible and measurable only in posture. The sergeant cleared his throat and returned to his clipboard, voice more subdued as he resumed the intake process. Anna took her place at the end of the new line, blue dress falling just below her knees, hands relaxed at her sides. She met Margaret's eyes once more, not seeking reassurance now, but acknowledging it. The nurse inclined her head slightly, as if to say nothing more was required. Outside, the distant whistle of another train drifted across the river, and for the first time since entering the hall, Anna did not feel as though she was stepping somewhere she had not earned. She felt as though she was simply standing where she was meant to stand. By late afternoon, the intake hall no longer smelled only of disinfectant and steam, but of cotton drying and something steadier, something closer to ordinary life. The women stood in small clusters near the far wall while the last names were entered into ledgers, their damp hair combed back, with simple wooden brushes issued from a supply crate. Sunlight filtered through the tall warehouse windows, angling across the concrete floor in pale gold stripes that caught on the edges of blue dresses and white cuffs. Anna felt the fabric settle against her skin as it dried, light but present, a reminder that the moment in the steam had not been imagined. She flexed her fingers once, testing the absence of grime beneath her nails. The cracked pipe had finally stopped dripping after a mechanic tightened it with a wrench, and the silence left behind felt deeper than before. Nurse Evelyn Harper moved along the line now with a clipboard of her own, checking temperatures, pulse rates, asking quiet questions about dizziness or coughs. Her voice carried a soft Kentucky cadence that rounded the edges of clinical words. When she reached Anna, she paused and offered a small glass thermometer. Anna accepted it without lowering her gaze. The exchange required no translation. Across the hall, Margaret Collins supervised the folding of the discarded garments into marked canvas sacks, ensuring that each bundle was labeled and stored rather than thrown aside. Nothing was burned. Nothing was treated as waste. The decision was deliberate. Anna noticed. She noticed the way Margaret lifted each worn dress with the same care she had shown the new cotton ones, as if history itself deserved order. A young enlisted man rolled in a cart of enamel mugs filled with hot broth. The smell of chicken and parsley spread slowly, threading through the room. For a moment, the women hesitated again, but the memory of warm water still lingered on their skin. Liesel stepped forward first this time, accepting a mug and nodding once in thanks. Anna followed. The broth was simple, salted lightly, heat radiating through the thin metal cup into her palms. She did not rush. She sipped once, then again, feeling the warmth move downward through her chest. The sergeant had retreated to a desk near the entrance, his earlier impatience replaced by a kind of watchful restraint. He spoke quietly to the corporal, who nodded and adjusted the stack of forms. Outside, the distant rumble of trucks along the river road signaled another convoy arriving, another group to process. Before nightfall, inside this hall, however, time had shifted into a slower measure. Margaret crossed the floor and stopped a few feet from Anna. "You will be assigned sleeping quarters in the East Wing," she said evenly. The corporal translated, but Anna understood enough of the English to catch the word quarters. She nodded. Margaret studied her posture for a moment. "There will be clean bedding," she added. Anna's eyes flickered briefly, not in disbelief this time, but in calculation, as if determining how much trust could fit into a single evening. "We will keep it," she said quietly in English. Margaret inclined her head. "That is the plan." Around them, the other women finished their broth, setting empty mugs carefully back on the cart rather than leaving them scattered. The gesture passed unnoticed by most, but Margaret saw it and said nothing. Order, once restored, often restores more than surfaces. As dusk approached, electric lights flickered on again, casting a steady glow that softened the edges of fatigue. The women were escorted in small groups down a wide corridor lined with stacked crates and medical supplies. Anna walked beside Liesel, their footsteps echoing faintly against brick. At the end of the corridor, a door opened into a long dormitory with rows of iron-framed beds, each made with white sheets tucked tight at hospital corners. A narrow window above each row allowed the last light of day to slip through. The room smelled faintly of starch. Anna paused at the threshold. The sight of so many identical beds might once have signaled confinement. Tonight it suggested something else. Consistency. A place to lie down without bracing for interruption. Margaret entered behind them, checking the arrangement of blankets, adjusting one pillow that sat askew. "Choose any," she said. The translation followed. Anna stepped toward the third bed from the left, running her fingers lightly along the sheet, as if testing its texture. The cotton was cool, smooth, unmarked. She sat slowly on the edge, the mattress dipping under her weight. For a moment, she simply remained there, hands resting on her knees, absorbing the stillness. Liesel chose the bed beside her. The other women dispersed quietly, placing their canvas sacks beneath the frames. There was no laughter, but there was no rigid silence either. The air held a cautious ease, like a room where a storm has passed but the clouds have not fully cleared. Margaret walked down the center aisle once more, observing without comment. When she reached Anna, she stopped. "You did well today," she said, voice low enough not to carry beyond the two beds. Anna looked up. The compliment startled her more than the bath had. "I stood," she replied simply. Margaret allowed herself a faint smile. "That is sometimes enough." She moved on. Anna lay back slowly against the pillow, staring at the ceiling beams painted a dull white. The day replayed in fragments. The drip of water, the warmth against her skin, the word ordinary. She turned her head slightly toward Liesel, who had already closed her eyes, breathing evenly. Outside the dormitory window, the sky shifted from pale gold to deep blue, and somewhere beyond the river a train whistle sounded again, long and low, carrying across the evening air. Anna did not flinch at the sound. She listened until it faded. In the dim light, her shoulders no longer curved inward. They rested against the mattress in a straight line. Across the hall, Margaret paused at the doorway and looked back once more at the rows of beds now occupied by women in simple blue dresses. The intake ledger on her desk listed names and numbers. What it did not record was the moment a room changed because someone removed a pair of gloves. She turned off the overhead lights one row at a time, leaving only the narrow lamps near the exits glowing softly. The dormitory settled into quiet breathing and distant river sounds. Anna closed her eyes not as someone bracing for orders, but as someone who understood that morning would come whether she deserved it or not. And when she exhaled, the breath left her chest without hesitation, as steady as the river beyond the walls. Morning entered the dormitory quietly, not with commands, but with light, thin and pale at first, slipping through the narrow windows above the iron bed frames and laying soft rectangles across the white sheets. Anna woke before the bell. For a moment, she did not remember where she was. The ceiling beams were unfamiliar, painted white instead of the dark which she had known as a child, and the air carried the faint scent of starch rather than coal smoke. Then she felt the cotton of the blue dress against her skin and the smoothness of clean sheets beneath her hands. She did not sit up immediately. She listened. Around her, steady breathing. The distant hum of generators. A cart rolling somewhere down the corridor. No raised voices. No rushing footsteps. She exhaled slowly and turned her head toward the window. Outside, the Rhine moved in a broad gray ribbon under a sky just beginning to lighten. The river did not hurry. It never had. When the bell rang, it was not harsh. A single clear tone, measured and brief. The women stirred, rising with the instinct of those accustomed to schedules. Anna sat upright, smoothing the blanket with deliberate care before placing her feet on the concrete floor. The coolness against her soles grounded her. Liesel was already awake beside her, braiding the short length of her hair as best she could. They exchanged a glance that required no translation. The corridor filled gradually with the sound of quiet movement, footsteps and fabric and the soft clearing of throats. In the East Wing dining hall, long wooden tables had been arranged in rows, enamel pitchers of water set evenly at intervals. Sunlight streamed through high windows, catching on suspended dust particles that drifted lazily in the air. Margaret Collins stood near the serving station, sleeves once again rolled precisely, her gloves resting unused on the counter beside her. She watched as the women entered in small groups, noting the change in posture from the day before. Shoulders less guarded, steps less tentative, not confident, not yet, but aligned. Anna joined the line for breakfast, hands folded loosely in front of her. The smell of oatmeal and toasted bread reached her before she saw the steam rising from metal trays. An enlisted man ladled oatmeal into bowls with mechanical efficiency, but his movements were not abrupt. When Anna's turn came, she held out her bowl without lowering her gaze. The man met her eyes briefly, nodded once, and filled it to the same level as the others. No more, no less. Equality measured in ounces. She carried the bowl to an empty seat beside Liesel. The wooden bench felt solid beneath her. She lifted a spoonful and paused, watching the steam curl upward. Yesterday, she had hesitated before stepping into warm water. Today she did not hesitate to eat. The oatmeal was plain, salted lightly, thicker than what she remembered from childhood, but steady. And filling. Around her, conversation began in low German murmurs. Not laughter. Not yet. But something closer to normal human sound. At the far end of the hall, a radio sat on a shelf near the door, volume turned low. American music drifted through the room, a slow swing melody carried by brass and soft percussion. The notes were unfamiliar, but the rhythm was even. Margaret moved between tables, checking for signs of illness, adjusting a pitcher that had been placed too close to the edge. When she reached Anna's table, she paused. "How did you sleep?" she asked in clear English. The corporal was not present this time. Anna considered the words, translating in her mind. "I slept," she replied simply. Margaret inclined her head, accepting the answer as sufficient. Good, she said, and moved on. After breakfast, the women were guided to a courtyard behind the warehouse, enclosed by brick walls but open to the sky. The morning sun had warmed the stones slightly, and the air carried the scent of river water and early spring grass. A stack of wooden crates had been arranged near one wall, and atop them rested bundles of folded cloth and small sewing kits. Evelyn Harper stood nearby, explaining through translation that the women would assist in mending linens for the medical wing. The work was voluntary but appreciated. Anna stepped forward almost without thinking. Before the war, she had mended book bindings with careful thread, stitching spines so that pages would hold. Fabric was different, but thread obeyed the same quiet rules. She took a seat on one of the crates, accepting a needle and spool. The cloth beneath her fingers felt sturdy. She threaded the needle with steady hands. Across the courtyard, Liesel began sorting pieces by size, arranging them in neat stacks. The rhythm of work settled over the group like a shared breath. Stitch, pull, smooth. No one rushed. No one ordered. Margaret watched from the doorway, arms crossed loosely, observing the pattern form without her directing it. A sergeant crossed the courtyard briefly, glanced at the scene, and continued on without comment. The women were not idle. They were not resisting. They were simply engaged. Anna finished her first seam and held the cloth up to inspect it. The stitches were small and even. She allowed herself the faintest nod before placing the mended linen in a completed pile. Evelyn approached, examining the work. That is precise, she said, smiling slightly. Anna understood the tone, even if the word precise required a moment to translate. She returned the smile, small but present. The sun climbed higher, warming the courtyard stones until the air felt almost gentle against their faces. A breeze carried the sound of river current beyond the wall. For the first time since arriving, Anna felt the space around her not as a holding place, but as a place of temporary order. She glanced toward the doorway where Margaret stood and caught the nurse watching the women with an expression that was neither pride nor relief, but something steadier. Recognition. The morning passed in measured tasks. At noon, the bell rang again, and the women rose without being told to line up. They gathered the finished linens, stacking them carefully. Anna wiped her hands on a clean cloth and looked once more at the sky above the brick walls. It was wide and pale and uninterrupted by smoke. She did not mistake the courtyard for freedom. The gates remained closed. The war had not vanished overnight. But within these walls, something had been restored that did not require permission from either side. As she followed the others back inside for the midday meal, her steps were no longer counted unconsciously. They fell into place with quiet certainty, as steady as the river that continued moving beyond sight, indifferent to borders yet constant in its course. The afternoon light shifted gradually across the courtyard stones, lengthening shadows until the brick walls held a softer tone, and by the time the women returned from the midday meal the air carried a quieter rhythm, less guarded, more settled. Anna resumed her place among the crates with the sewing kit resting in her palm, the needle glinting briefly in the sun before she guided it through cloth with steady pressure. The motion felt familiar now, less like proof of usefulness and more like continuation. Around her, the other women worked in measured silence, their shoulders no longer drawn tight against their collars. A small breeze moved through the open yard, lifting the edge of a folded linen sheet and brushing it gently against Anna's wrist. She did not pull away. Across the courtyard, Nurse Evelyn Harper organized finished stacks into neat bundles, securing each with twine before carrying them. Toward the medical wing, Margaret Collins stood near the doorway again, observing not as a supervisor tallying productivity, but as someone measuring atmosphere. She noticed the subtle exchanges that required no translation. Liesel passing a threaded needle without being asked, another woman smoothing a crease before placing a cloth in the completed pile, a quiet nod shared over a well-stitched seam. These were small gestures, almost invisible, yet they formed a pattern stronger than orders. The sun warmed the stone until the air felt almost like early summer, though it was only April. Anna paused for a moment and looked upward at the slice of sky, framed by brick. Clouds moved slowly, white and untroubled. The war still existed beyond these walls. She understood that clearly. But here, within this contained space, There was an absence of humiliation that felt unfamiliar and fragile. A guard crossed the courtyard with a clipboard tucked under his arm, glancing briefly at the women before continuing on without interruption. His presence did not tighten the air the way it might have days earlier. Authority, when quiet, could exist without pressing down. Anna finished another seam and flexed her fingers, noticing how the blue cotton of her dress had begun to crease naturally at the elbows. It no longer felt like borrowed clothing. It felt worn, slightly warmed by her own movement. Liesel leaned closer and spoke softly in German, remarking that the thread here was stronger than what they had used in Cologne. Anna nodded, allowing herself a faint smile. "It holds," she replied. The words carried more meaning than fabric alone. Later in the afternoon, Margaret stepped into the courtyard carrying a small stack of envelopes and plain paper. She set them on a crate and addressed the group through measured English, pausing for translation. "You may write," she said. "Letters will be reviewed, then sent." The women looked at one another, uncertainty passing between them like a shared breath. Writing required acknowledgement of connection beyond the walls. Anna felt her pulse quicken slightly. She had not held a pen in months. Margaret placed a pencil in her hand without ceremony. The wood felt smooth, sharpened to a fine point. Anna turned the pencil once between her fingers, then sat down on the edge of a crate. The paper rested on her lap, blank and waiting. For several seconds, she did not write. She watched the tip hover just above the page, considering what words could cross distance without reopening wounds. Around her, the others began slowly, heads bent, the scratch of graphite against paper creating a faint chorus. Finally, Anna lowered the pencil and formed the first letter of her mother's name. The graphite line looked darker than she expected. She wrote carefully, each word deliberate, describing the river, the courtyard, the blue dress. She did not describe the moment in the steam directly. Instead, she wrote that she had stood and that she was treated as someone who could stand. When she finished, she folded the paper once and held it for a moment before placing it in the envelope. Margaret moved among them quietly, collecting the letters without reading them in that instant, placing them into a canvas pouch. "They will go out tomorrow," she said evenly. The sun dipped lower, casting amber light across the courtyard stones. The breeze cooled slightly, carrying the scent of water and distant wood smoke. Anna rose and brushed stray threads from her lap. The day had passed without command or reprimand. Work had filled the hours, but not as punishment, as participation. As the women were guided back inside for the evening meal, the rhythm of footsteps echoed gently down the corridor. In the dining hall, the radio played again, softer this time, a slow instrumental piece that carried no urgency. Anna carried her tray to the same seat she had chosen that morning. The oatmeal had been replaced with soup and a slice of bread, modest and sufficient. She ate without haste, aware that hunger no longer dictated pace. Across the room, Margaret spoke briefly with the sergeant, their conversation low and measured. There was no visible disagreement, only coordination. The intake ledger rested closed on the desk. Names had been recorded. Something else, though undocumented, had also been marked. After the meal, the women returned to the dormitory as twilight deepened beyond the windows. Anna paused beside her bed and ran her hand once along the white sheet before sitting. She thought of the letter now sealed in a canvas pouch, of the pencil marks drying invisibly into permanence. She lay back slowly, staring at the beams overhead. The day had not erased the past. It had not rewritten the war, but it had placed a quiet boundary around humiliation, refusing to let it define the present. Outside, the Rhine continued its steady course under a darkening sky. Anna listened to the faint rush of water carried on the evening air and felt her breathing match its rhythm. Within these brick walls, something subtle had taken root. Not dramatic, not loud, but persistent. She closed her eyes knowing that tomorrow would arrive without spectacle, bringing more small tasks, more ordinary gestures. And for the first time since stepping into the intake hall, she did not question whether she was fit to receive what was given. She simply allowed the night to settle around her, calm and unforced, as steady as the river moving beyond sight. The next morning arrived with a thin veil of fog rising from the Rhine, softening the outlines of the warehouse and turning the courtyard bricks a muted gray. Anna woke before the bell again, her body adjusting to a rhythm that no longer felt imposed. For a moment she lay still, listening to the quiet breathing of the dormitory and the faint sound of river water moving beyond the walls. The sheets were no longer foreign against her skin. They held the warmth of the night, creased naturally where she had turned in her sleep. She sat up slowly and placed her feet on the floor, noticing that she did not hesitate before standing. Across the aisle, Liesel was already smoothing her blanket with careful hands, as if restoring order to the bed affirmed something inward as well. When the bell rang, the tone carried through the wing without sharpness. The women rose in unison, not rushed, not delayed. In the corridor, footsteps echoed evenly against brick, the sound no longer heavy with uncertainty. Breakfast unfolded with the same steady measure as the day before. Oatmeal, bread, a small portion of stewed apples. Anna took her seat and bowed her head briefly, not in formal prayer, but in quiet acknowledgement of the meal set before her. The radio near the doorway played a slower melody that morning, a piano piece carried by soft strings. The music drifted through the hall without commanding attention, simply existing as part of the air. Margaret Collins moved between tables again, checking temperatures with the back of her hand, adjusting a pitcher that tilted too close to the edge. When she reached Anna, she paused a moment longer than usual. "You look stronger," she said plainly. Anna considered the words. "I feel steady," she replied, the English clearer than before. Margaret nodded once. "That is a good beginning." After breakfast, instead of returning immediately to the courtyard, the women were directed to a large interior room once used for storing fabric rolls. The bolts of cloth were gone now, replaced by long tables and wooden chairs arranged in rows. Sunlight filtered through high windows, casting pale rectangles across the tabletops. At the front of the room stood a chalkboard balanced on two crates. Evelyn Harper placed a small box of chalk on the ledge and turned to face the group. Through translation, she explained that basic English lessons would begin that morning for those who wished to attend. Participation was voluntary. Anna felt a quiet stir in her chest. Language had always been structured to her, letters arranged into meaning, shelves ordered by title and author. She took a seat near the front, folding her hands on the table. Liesel joined her, offering a faint smile. Margaret stood near the back wall, observing without intervening. Evelyn wrote a single word on the board in careful block letters, water. She spoke it slowly, allowing the syllables to settle. The corporal translated into German, then invited the women to repeat the English word. The sound moved hesitantly at first, uneven in tone, then steadier on the second attempt. Anna shaped the word carefully, feeling the curve of the first letter against her tongue. Water. The word carried memory, not of deprivation now, but of warmth rising in steam. Evelyn wrote another word, clean. A pause followed, longer this time. Anna's gaze fixed on the chalk. The word remained still, white against black. Evelyn pronounced it clearly, then waited. One by one, the women repeated it. Clean. The sound did not carry the weight it once had. It did not accuse. It described. Anna felt the shift inside her as she spoke it, subtle yet undeniable. The lesson continued with simple phrases. I am here. This is bread. The door is open. Each sentence grounded in the present tense, intangible objects. Margaret watched as the women's shoulders loosened slightly with each correct repetition, as if comprehension itself restored proportion. After an hour, the chalkboard held a small constellation of words, and the room hummed softly with attempts at pronunciation. When the lesson ended, the women gathered their chairs without being instructed, aligning them neatly against the wall. Anna remained seated a moment longer, tracing the word clean with her eyes before rising. In the corridor afterward, she approached Margaret with deliberate steps. May I ask, she began, pausing to assemble the English carefully. Margaret inclined her head. You may. Anna hesitated only a second. Why did you remove your gloves? The question lingered between them, neither accusing nor reverent. Margaret considered her answer. Because sometimes protection becomes distance, she said evenly. The corporal was not present. Anna understood enough to follow the meaning. She absorbed the sentence slowly, committing it to memory as she might have memorized a line of poetry years earlier. Protection becomes distance. She nodded once, then stepped back. The afternoon brought another session in the courtyard, this time sorting medical supplies under supervision. Boxes of bandages and gauze were arranged in measured stacks, labels facing outward. The work required precision, and Anna moved with steady hands, aligning edges, counting rolls, noting numbers aloud in tentative English. The breeze carried the faint scent of river water again, mingling with clean cotton and paper. Across the yard, Margaret spoke quietly with the sergeant, their conversation calm, almost routine. Authority here did not thunder. It adjusted. As the sun lowered, casting long shadows across the bricks, Anna paused and looked toward the warehouse door. The first day in the intake hall felt distant now, not erased but integrated into the rhythm of the week. She flexed her fingers, noticing that the small tremor had vanished. When the bell rang for the evening meal, she rose without hesitation. In the dining hall, the radio played again, and the sound no longer seemed foreign. She carried her tray to the bench and sat upright, shoulders aligned naturally. Across from her, Liesel repeated one of the English phrases softly, testing the sound. "I am here," she said, almost to herself. Anna echoed it, the words steady. "I am here." The sentence required no translation, no justification. It simply existed. Outside, the Rhine continued its patient course beneath a sky shifting from pale gold to blue. Within the brick walls, the women moved through their evening with quiet assurance, the small rituals of washing dishes and folding blankets unfolding without instruction. When Anna lay down that night, she did not stare at the ceiling searching for permission to rest. She closed her eyes knowing that the day had held work, words, and something less visible but more durable. Not absolution, not triumph, steadiness. And as sleep settled over the dormitory in even breaths and distant river sounds, the space between protection and distance felt smaller than before, bridged not by force, but by the simple act of standing, speaking, and being answered without gloves. The seventh morning arrived with clearer light. The fog lifted from the river and replaced by a sky stretched wide and pale blue above the brick walls. Anna woke to the sound of a cart rolling steadily down the corridor, metal wheels turning in even rhythm. She did not need the bell to rise. Her body had begun to trust the sequence of days. She sat up and folded her blanket with careful precision, pressing the creases flat with both palms before standing. Across the aisle, Liesel was already tying the laces of her issued shoes, movements calm, unhurried. The dormitory no longer felt like a temporary holding space. It felt structured, measured, predictable in a way that allowed breath to deepen without caution. When the bell sounded, its single tone moved through the room like a reminder rather than a command. In the dining hall, the air carried the smell of brewed coffee mixed with oatmeal and warm bread. The radio played softly again, a familiar swing melody that seemed less foreign now. Anna took her place in line, noticing how the women no longer watched the floor as they waited. They stood upright, shoulders aligned naturally, eyes level. When her bowl was filled, she stepped aside and carried it to the bench beside Liesel without hesitation. Margaret Collins entered shortly after, sleeves rolled, her posture steady. She paused near the doorway and observed the room as if confirming that nothing had slipped out of place overnight. Her gaze moved briefly toward Anna, not lingering, simply acknowledging. After breakfast, the women were directed once more to the large interior room with the chalkboard. The sunlight angled through the high windows in bright slants, illuminating dust motes that drifted slowly in the still air. Evelyn Harper stood at the front again, chalk in hand. She wrote 3 words across the board in careful letters: dignity, respect, ordinary. The corporal translated each word into German, but Anna found that she no longer needed to wait for every syllable. She recognized the shape of the first word from yesterday's lesson, its weight familiar even in English. Evelyn spoke each word slowly, encouraging repetition. The room filled with tentative voices shaping the sounds, smoothing them on the second attempt. Anna repeated dignity with steady clarity. The word did not feel abstract. It felt anchored to the memory of steam and warm water and bare hands without gloves. Evelyn then wrote a simple sentence beneath the words, "We stand." The corporal translated, but Anna spoke the English phrase first, the syllables firm. "We stand." The room echoed the repetition, voices uneven yet unified. Margaret watched from the back of the room, arms folded loosely, her expression composed. She did not correct pronunciation. She did not hurry the pace. The lesson unfolded in measured rhythm, building phrases from the foundation of the previous days. I am clean. I am here. We stand together. Each sentence was simple, almost childlike in construction, yet the air shifted with each repetition. Words, once tools of command or accusation, were now arranged into statements of presence. After the lesson, the women were assigned to assist in organizing supply inventories in a side warehouse adjoining the main hall. Crates of bandages, soap, and folded uniforms were stacked along the walls, labeled in black ink. Anna moved methodically among them, reading the English labels aloud softly to herself, testing the sounds. Soap, towel, blanket. Her pronunciation grew smoother with each attempt. Liesel counted packages beside her, noting numbers in German and then repeating them in English under her breath. Margaret entered briefly to review the arrangement, adjusting one stack that leaned slightly. Alignment prevents confusion, she said evenly, half to herself. Anna absorbed the sentence as if it were part of the lesson. Alignment prevents confusion. She straightened the edge of a crate and felt a quiet satisfaction at the clean line it formed. Midday light filtered through the high windows, warming the air and casting long beams across the concrete floor. A breeze slipped in through a partially open door, carrying the scent of the river and distant grass. The work required no haste. It required attention. The women moved with steady focus, no longer glancing toward the doorway at every footstep. Authority passed through the warehouse occasionally in the form of a guard or clerk, but it did not interrupt the rhythm. It observed and moved on. Later in the afternoon, Margaret gathered the women in the courtyard once more. She carried a small stack of folded garments, freshly laundered, and placed them on a crate. These are replacements for worn pieces, she explained through translation. If you need them, take them. There was no instruction to line up, no allocation by rank. Anna stepped forward and examined one dress briefly, feeling the texture between her fingers. She did not take it. The one she wore was still sound. Liesel chose a new blouse, nodding quietly in thanks. The distribution occurred without tension, each woman selecting what was necessary, nothing more. As the sun lowered, casting amber light across the courtyard bricks, Anna paused and looked toward Margaret. May I practice? She asked in English, forming the sentence carefully. Margaret nodded. You may. Anna straightened slightly. We stand with dignity, she said, the words deliberate and clear. A faint smile touched Margaret's expression. Yes, she replied softly. You do. The breeze lifted the edge of Anna's sleeve, warm and gentle. The phrase settled into the courtyard air, not as proclamation, but as quiet truth. When the bell rang for the evening meal, the women gathered the remaining supplies and carried them inside without prompting. In the dining hall, the radio played again, the melody steady and familiar. Anna took her seat and noticed that her hands no longer trembled when lifting the spoon. Across the table, Liesel repeated the new words softly, practicing their sound. Dignity, respect, ordinary. They did not sound like distant ideals. They sounded like measurements of daily action. After supper, the dormitory filled with the soft murmur of evening routines. Blankets folded, shoes placed neatly beneath beds. The narrow lamps near the exits glowed faintly, casting gentle halos of light. Anna lay back against her pillow and stared at the ceiling beams, the white paint reflecting the dim glow. She thought of the first day in the intake hall, of the silence that had pressed against her chest, of the word unclean that had once felt immovable. Now another word rested there instead. Dignity. It did not erase the past. It did not rewrite the river's course. But it stood alongside memory without fear. Outside, the Rhine moved steadily under a darkening sky, indifferent to the borders that define nations yet constant in its direction. Within the brick walls, the women breathed in even rhythm, the day settling into quiet certainty. Anna closed her eyes knowing that tomorrow would bring more words, more small tasks, more ordinary gestures. And in that ordinariness, she understood, there was strength. Not loud, not dramatic, simply present. And she allowed sleep to take her without hesitation, her breathing steady, her shoulders aligned, her place in the room no longer questioned. On the 8th morning the light entered earlier and stronger, clear sunlight stretching across the dormitory floor in long golden bands that reached the legs of each iron bed. Anna opened her eyes before the bell, aware of the warmth against her cheek and the steady rhythm of breathing around her. For a moment, she watched the light move slowly across the white sheet beside her hand. It did not rush. It did not demand. It simply advanced with quiet certainty. She sat up and folded her blanket, pressing each edge flat with calm precision. The gesture had become familiar now, not an attempt to prove worth, but an expression of alignment. Across the aisle, Liesel was already standing, smoothing her hair with her fingers, her posture relaxed. The dormitory no longer carried the fragile tension of the first nights. It held a low, steady hum of routine. When the bell rang, its single tone sounded almost ceremonial, marking transition rather than control. In the dining hall, the windows had been opened slightly to allow the mild spring air to circulate. The scent of fresh bread mingled with brewed coffee and warm oats. Anna stepped into line with even shoulders and level gaze. An enlisted man at the serving station offered a faint nod as he filled her bowl. The exchange was brief and unremarkable. That unremarkable quality carried weight. She carried her tray to the bench and sat beside Liesel, setting the bowl down carefully. The radio near the doorway played a familiar melody again, a slow brass arrangement that rose and fell like breathing. Margaret Collins entered the hall moments later, sleeves rolled, expression steady. She paused near the threshold and surveyed the room as she had each morning, her attention moving not in suspicion but in observation. When her gaze reached Anna, it lingered a fraction longer, not in scrutiny, but in recognition. After breakfast, the women were directed not to the classroom or courtyard, but to the far end of the warehouse complex where large doors opened toward the river. The morning sun flooded through the opening, illuminating the wide concrete space and the stacks of wooden crates arranged along the walls. A truck had arrived before dawn carrying additional supplies for the medical wing, and volunteers were needed to sort and inventory the contents. The sergeant explained the task through translation, his tone measured. Participation was requested, not demanded. Anna stepped forward with the others, the word requested settling quietly in her mind. The crates were marked in English with black ink. Soap bars, cotton rolls, towels, blankets. Anna knelt beside one crate and pried it open with a small metal tool handed to her by a clerk. The lid lifted with a soft creak. Inside, rows of neatly wrapped soap bars lay in precise alignment. She reached in and lifted one, turning it in her palm. The scent was clean and faintly floral. For a brief second, the memory of the first steam rose before her eyes, but it did not tighten her chest. It felt integrated, part of a sequence rather than an isolated shock. She placed the bar back into the crate and began counting aloud in English. 1, 2, 3, 4. Her voice carried clearly in the open space. Liesel joined her from the next crate, repeating the numbers in steady rhythm. The sound of counting filled the warehouse, overlapping voices creating a pattern of order. Margaret moved through the rows, checking tallies and adjusting labels. At one point, she stopped beside Anna and glanced at the numbers written in chalk on the side of the crate. Accurate, she said simply. Anna looked up. I am learning, she replied in careful English. Margaret nodded. You are practicing. The distinction lingered in Anna's mind. Learning implied instruction. Practicing implied participation. The large doors remained open, and beyond them the Rhine moved under bright daylight, its surface catching glints of sun like scattered coins. A breeze carried the scent of water and distant grass into the warehouse. Guards passed occasionally along the perimeter, but their presence did not constrict the space. The women worked steadily, lifting, counting, stacking. No raised voices. No sharp commands. Only measured coordination. At midday a break was called, and the group gathered near the open doors to drink water from enamel cups. Anna stood just inside the threshold, watching. The river's current move in broad, patient arcs. She had seen rivers before, but never with this clarity of stillness. It flowed without apology, without hesitation. Liesel joined her, following her gaze. It does not ask permission, Liesel said quietly in German. Anna nodded. It moves, she replied. The words required no translation. Behind them, Margaret spoke briefly with the sergeant, discussing the remaining crates and the schedule for the afternoon. The conversation was calm, professional. Authority here adjusted rather than imposed. After the break, the women resumed work with renewed steadiness. Anna found herself organizing a row of blankets by size, smoothing each one with deliberate care before stacking it in even piles. The repetition felt grounding. She noticed that her hands no longer trembled when touching clean fabric. The blue dress she wore moved naturally with her, creasing and settling as though it belonged. As the sun climbed higher, the warehouse warmed, light reflecting off the concrete floor. The open doors framed the river like a moving painting. When the final crate was tallied and sealed with fresh markings, the sergeant approached the group. "Well done," he said, voice even. The translation followed, but the tone required little interpretation. The words were simple, almost understated. Yet they marked acknowledgement of effort without condescension. Anna felt the phrase settle within her, not as praise, but as confirmation of alignment. The group returned to the dining hall for the midday meal, footsteps echoing lightly through the corridor. The radio played again, softer now, as if blending into the afternoon air. Anna carried her tray and sat upright, her movements unhurried. Across the table, Liesel practiced another English phrase under her breath. "We work with care," she said softly. Anna repeated it, shaping the syllables carefully. The words felt accurate. After the meal, the women were dismissed to the courtyard for a short period of rest before the next assignment. Anna stepped outside and felt the sunlight warm her shoulders. She stood still for a moment, breathing in the scent of grass and river water carried on the breeze. The brick walls enclosed the space, but the sky above remained open and wide. She did not mistake the courtyard for freedom. Yet within it she felt neither diminished nor invisible. Margaret stepped into the courtyard a few minutes later and approached Anna without urgency. "You are standing differently now," she observed. Quietly, Anna considered the statement. "I am not hiding," she replied. Margaret inclined her head. "No," she said. "You are not." The afternoon shadows began to lengthen across the courtyard stones, stretching toward the brick walls. The bell would ring again soon, marking another transition in the steady pattern of days. Anna looked once more toward the slice of river visible beyond the warehouse doors. It moved forward without hesitation, carrying light across its surface. Within the walls of brick and iron beds and chalkboards, something had begun to move as well. Not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily. And as Anna turned back toward the dormitory corridor, her steps aligned with that quiet current, measured and assured, no longer questioning whether she was fit to receive what was offered, but participating fully in its unfolding. The 9th day unfolded beneath a sky washed clean by overnight rain. The courtyard stones still darkened in irregular patches where water had gathered and then receded. Anna woke to the faint scent of damp air drifting through the narrow dormitory windows, mingling with starch and cotton. She lay still for a moment, listening to the softened sounds of morning. The distant roll of a cart wheel, the muted clink of enamel cups being stacked somewhere down the corridor, the low murmur of women rising without urgency. The bell rang, its tone carrying through the wing like a familiar note in a melody already learned. She sat up and folded her blanket with measured precision, pressing her palms along the edges, aligning corners with quiet care. Across the aisle, Liesel met her eyes and offered a small nod. It was not encouragement. It was recognition. In the dining hall, the air held the scent of coffee and fresh bread, richer this morning as if the rain had sharpened it. Sunlight filtered through thin clouds, casting a diffused glow across the long wooden tables. Anna took her place in line, hands relaxed at her sides, shoulders steady. When her bowl was filled, she inclined her head slightly in acknowledgement and moved aside without hesitation. The exchange required no translation, no rehearsal. It had become part of the rhythm. Margaret Collins entered a few moments later, sleeves rolled, hair pinned back neatly beneath her cap. She paused near the radio, adjusting the volume slightly as a slow piano piece drifted through the hall. The melody was gentle, deliberate. It did not compete with conversation. It accompanied it. After breakfast, the women were directed back to the large classroom with the chalkboard. The air carried the scent of chalk dust and damp wool. Evelyn Harper stood at the front once more, her posture upright, expression attentive. She wrote a new phrase on the board in careful letters. "We belong here today." The corporal translated, but Anna found her eyes moving over the English words first. Belong. The word lingered longer than the others had. Evelyn pronounced it slowly, breaking it into syllables, inviting repetition. The women's voices followed, uneven at first, then steadier. Anna shaped the word deliberately, feeling its weight settle differently than dignity or respect. Belong implied place. It implied present time. She repeated the phrase softly, then again with clearer tone. We belong here today. Margaret stood at the back wall, listening without interruption. The lesson continued with short exchanges. Where are you? I am here. What do you need? I need water. The phrases were simple, practical, grounded in immediate reality. Anna answered each question with measured clarity, her accent still present but less hesitant. When Evelyn asked, "Who are you?" the room grew momentarily still. The corporal translated. Anna inhaled once and answered in English before the translation finished. I am Anna Keller. The sound of her full name in that room felt like an anchor placed firmly on the floor. No one corrected her. No one challenged it. Evelyn nodded. Yes, she said softly. You are. The class concluded with quiet repetition of the morning phrase. We belong here today. The women gathered their chairs and aligned them against the wall without prompting. Outside, the courtyard stones had begun to dry, the sun warming their surfaces in mottled patterns. Anna stepped into the open air and felt the breeze move lightly against her sleeves. The river beyond the warehouse flowed steady, slightly higher from the rain, its surface carrying faint ripples that caught the light. Work assignments that afternoon involved organizing medical charts in a side office near the intake hall. The room was smaller, lined with metal cabinets and narrow desks stacked with folders. Anna was given a simple task: arrange files alphabetically by last name. The instruction required no translation. It felt almost like returning to the bookshop in Cologne, shelves ordered by author, spines aligned in quiet rows. She handled each folder carefully, reading the English names aloud under her breath as she placed them in sequence. Anderson, Baker, Collins, Harper, Keller. She paused briefly at her own name in a thin manila folder, then placed it in its proper position between Kane and Klein. The act was ordinary, yet the alignment of letters and order restored something steady within her. Margaret entered midway through the task, reviewing a stack of papers at the desk. She glanced toward Anna and noticed the careful arrangement. You have an eye for order, she observed evenly. Anna looked up. Order helps, she replied in clear English. Margaret inclined her head. It does. The afternoon passed in measured quiet. Papers shifted, drawers closed with soft metallic clicks. Sunlight moved slowly across the narrow floor. There were no raised voices. No hurried commands. Authority in this space adjusted to rhythm rather than imposing it. When the last file was placed in sequence, Anna stepped back from the cabinet and examined the straight line of folders. The names formed a pattern that required no explanation. She felt the same quiet satisfaction she had known arranging poetry on wooden shelves years earlier. As the bell rang for the evening meal, she walked toward the dining hall with steady steps, not counting them, not measuring distance. Liesel joined her along the corridor. Belong, Liesel said softly in English, testing the word again. Anna nodded. Today, she replied. The dining hall glowed with warm light as dusk settled beyond the windows. The radio played a gentle melody, and the scent of soup drifted through the air. Anna carried her tray and sat upright, hands resting easily beside her bowl. Across the table, Liesel repeated the morning phrase quietly. We belong here today. The words did not promise permanence. They did not erase the war beyond the river. They simply acknowledged presence. After supper, the women returned to the dormitory, their movements calm and unforced. Anna placed her shoes neatly beneath the bed and lay back against the pillow, watching the ceiling beams fade into shadow as the lamps were dimmed. The rain-washed air moved faintly through the open window, carrying the steady sound of the Rhine. She listened to it without tension. The river did not question its course. It did not ask whether it was worthy of flowing forward. It moved because movement was its nature. Within the brick walls, Anna felt a similar current forming, quiet but persistent. Not dramatic, not loud, simply steady. She closed her eyes and allowed the phrase to settle one final time before sleep. We belong here today. And in the stillness that followed, the words felt neither borrowed nor fragile. They felt true. The 10th morning carried a brightness that felt almost deliberate, as if the sky itself had chosen clarity after days of quiet adjustment. Sunlight streamed through the narrow dormitory windows in long, uninterrupted beams, touching the iron bed frames and casting thin shadows across the white sheets. Anna opened her eyes to that light and did not need a moment to remember where she was. The ceiling beams above her were no longer unfamiliar. The scent of clean cotton and early spring air felt steady, expected. She sat up and rested her feet on the cool concrete floor, noticing the absence of hesitation in the movement. Across the aisle, Liesel was already smoothing her blanket, her motions unhurried and precise. The bell rang once, a single tone that marked the beginning of another measured day. In the dining hall, the windows had been opened wider, allowing fresh air to circulate through the long wooden tables. The scent of brewed coffee mingled with warm bread and something faintly sweet, perhaps a small portion of stewed fruit. Anna stepped into line with relaxed shoulders, her gaze level. When the enlisted man filled her bowl, she met his eyes briefly and said, "Thank you," in clear English. The words were simple, but they carried weight. He nodded once in acknowledgement. Margaret Collins entered moments later, sleeves rolled as always, her presence steady without being imposing. She paused near the radio, which played a soft piano arrangement, and then moved through the tables with quiet observation. When she reached Anna, she did not ask a question this time. She simply noted the tone of her voice and the steadiness of her hands. After breakfast, the women gathered in the courtyard, where the sun warmed the bricks and the sky stretched wide and cloudless above the walls. Evelyn Harper joined them with a stack of small notebooks and pencils. Through translation, she explained that each woman would receive a notebook for practice, for writing, for recording new English words or private thoughts. The notebooks were plain, bound in thin cardboard covers, their pages blank and waiting. Anna accepted one and turned it over in her hands. The weight felt modest but significant. A blank page offered space without accusation. The group was then directed back to the classroom, where Evelyn wrote a new sentence on the chalkboard. "We choose how we stand." The corporal translated, but Anna followed the English first. Choose. The word lingered differently than belong or dignity. It implied decision. It implied agency. Evelyn pronounced the sentence slowly, and the women repeated it in uneven unison. "We choose how we stand." Anna felt the phrase settle in her chest, steady and grounded. The lesson moved into short dialogues. "How do you stand?" Evelyn asked gently. One woman answered, "I stand with respect." Another replied, "I stand with care." When it was Anna's turn, she paused only briefly. "I stand with dignity," she said clearly. Margaret, observing from the back wall, inclined her head almost imperceptibly. The classroom carried no applause, no dramatic acknowledgement. Only steady repetition and the scratch of pencils as the women copied the sentence into their notebooks. After the lesson, assignments shifted again. This time the women were asked to assist in organizing a small infirmary room adjacent to the intake hall. Shelves of folded linens and glass jars lined the walls. Sunlight filtered through a narrow window, illuminating dust motes in quiet motion. Anna was given the task of labeling jars of cotton and gauze with printed English tags. She dipped a pen into ink and wrote each word slowly, carefully shaping each letter. Cotton, gauze, soap. Her handwriting was deliberate, each stroke measured. Margaret entered midway through the task and watched as Anna aligned a label precisely along the glass. "Your hand is steady," Margaret observed softly. Anna glanced up. "It is steadier now," she replied. Margaret nodded. "That matters." Outside the infirmary window, the Rhine moved under the midday sun, its surface glinting in bright reflections. The river's motion felt constant, not urgent. Anna finished labeling the last jar and stepped back to observe the shelf. The rows stood straight and even, the words clear and readable. She felt a quiet satisfaction not because the work was noticed, but because it was aligned. In the afternoon, a small gathering was called in the courtyard. The sergeant stood near the doorway, clipboard in hand, and informed the group that mail had arrived. Margaret stepped forward with a canvas pouch and began calling names in careful English. When she reached Keller, Anna felt her breath catch briefly before stepping forward. Margaret handed her a single envelope, thin and creased at the edges. Anna recognized her mother's handwriting immediately. The sight of it steadied her more than she expected. She did not open it at once. She held it carefully, feeling the paper between her fingers, the weight of ink pressed from across distance. Margaret did not speak. She simply met Anna's eyes and stepped aside. Anna moved toward the edge of the courtyard and sat on a low brick ledge. The breeze lifted the corner of the envelope slightly. She opened it with deliberate care and unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting was firm, the words written in German. Her mother described the rebuilding of their small apartment, the clearing of debris, the planting of early spring flowers in a narrow window box. She wrote that the river near their home still flowed as it always had. She wrote that she hoped Anna stood tall wherever she was. Anna read the line twice. Stood tall. The phrase echoed the morning lesson. She folded the letter gently and placed it inside her notebook for safekeeping. When she returned to the center of the courtyard, Liesel was reading her own letter, eyes steady rather than tearful. The group remained quiet, not intruding on one another's private moments. The sun lowered slowly, casting long amber light across the bricks. Margaret approached Anna once more. "Good news?" she asked softly. Anna nodded. "She says the river flows," she replied in English. Margaret glanced toward the distant shimmer beyond the warehouse doors. "It does," she said. The bell rang for the evening meal, its tone familiar and measured. Anna walked toward the dining hall with the letter secured in her notebook and the notebook held against her side. Her steps were even, uncounted. In the hall the radio played a gentle melody, and the scent of soup rose warmly in the air. She took her seat and unfolded her napkin with quiet precision. Across the table Liesel repeated the morning sentence softly, almost as affirmation. "We choose how we stand." Anna echoed it under her breath, not as rehearsal but as recognition. When the lamps dimmed later that night and the dormitory settled into steady breathing, Anna lay back against her pillow and held the notebook briefly against her chest. Outside, the Rhine moved forward beneath a sky deepening into blue. The river did not hesitate. It did not question its course. Within the brick walls, Anna felt that same current move quietly through her. Not loud, not dramatic, simply chosen. And as she closed her eyes, the phrase remained clear and steady. "We choose how we stand." And she understood that she had already chosen. The 11th morning carried a softness that felt earned, the light entering the dormitory in a wide golden sweep that reached the far wall and rested there as if unwilling to retreat. Anna opened her eyes before the bell once more, the notebook still tucked beneath her pillow where she had placed it the night before. For a moment she lay still, listening to the steady breathing around her and the faint murmur of the river beyond the warehouse walls. She no longer needed to orient herself. The ceiling beams, the scent of clean cotton, the measured quiet had become part of her internal map. She sat up and drew the notebook into her hands, opening it to the page where she had copied the sentence from the day before. "We choose how we stand." The words looked firm in graphite, neither ornate nor fragile. She traced them once with her finger, then closed the notebook and folded her blanket with deliberate care. When the bell sounded, it felt less like a summons and more like acknowledgement that time continued forward. In the dining hall the morning air was warm, the windows open wide enough to allow a clear view of the pale blue sky. The scent of bread and coffee rose steadily, familiar and grounding. Anna stepped into line, hands relaxed at her sides. When her bowl was filled she met the enlisted man's eyes and nodded once, a quiet exchange that required no additional words. Margaret Collins entered moments later, sleeves rolled as always, her posture composed. She paused near the radio, which played a gentle string arrangement, and then moved through the tables, observing without intrusion. When she reached Anna's table, she rested her hand briefly on the back of an empty chair. "You received a letter," she said softly. It was not a question. Anna nodded. "Yes," she replied in clear English. "She writes that the flowers are growing." Margaret's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "That is good news," she said. Anna inclined her head. "Yes, it is." After breakfast, the women gathered in the courtyard where the sun warmed the bricks and the river shimmered beyond the warehouse doors. Evelyn Harper stood with a small stack of folded papers. Through translation, she explained that a short ceremony would take place that afternoon. Some of the women would be reassigned to different facilities in the coming weeks as the war's end approached. It was not a dismissal. It was a transition. The word transition moved quietly through the group, neither alarming nor celebratory. It suggested movement with structure. Anna felt the notebook's weight in her pocket and understood that movement did not erase what had been learned. The morning tasks were lighter than usual. Instead of sorting supplies or labeling jars, the women were invited to write a single sentence in English on a large sheet of paper that would be placed in the classroom, a collective record of what they had practiced. The sheet was spread across a long table, held flat by small glass weights at each corner. One by one, the women approached with pencils in hand. Some wrote carefully formed words. Others printed short phrases learned in recent days. When Anna's turn came, she paused only briefly before writing in steady, deliberate letters. "We stand with dignity." The graphite pressed cleanly into the page. She stepped back and examined the line among the others. "We belong here today. We choose how we stand. I am here." The sentences were simple, yet together they formed a quiet declaration. Margaret stood nearby, observing the growing page. She did not add her own words. She did not alter a single letter. The sheet was later pinned to the chalkboard in the classroom, where sunlight caught the pencil strokes and made them appear almost embossed. In the afternoon, as promised, a brief gathering took place in the courtyard. The sergeant stood near the doorway with his clipboard, his tone measured as he read several names that would be transferred in the coming days. When he spoke Anna's name, she felt a steady calm rather than a tightening in her chest. Margaret stepped forward with a small envelope containing reassignment details. She handed it to Anna without ceremony. "You will be moved to a larger facility closer to Cologne," she explained gently. "It will assist with repatriation." Anna listened carefully, the English clear enough now to understand without translation. Cologne. The name carried memory and distance at once. She nodded. "Thank you," she said. The words were not automatic. They were chosen. Margaret met her gaze evenly. "You will continue to stand," she said softly. It was not instruction. It was affirmation. The ceremony concluded without applause, without dramatic farewell. The women dispersed into small groups, some embracing briefly, others exchanging quiet promises to write if possible. Liesel approached Anna and held her hands for a moment. "You will see the river again," Liesel said in German. Anna smiled faintly. "Yes," she replied. "It flows." The afternoon passed in subdued preparation. Anna returned to the dormitory and placed her notebook and her mother's letter into a small canvas bag provided for the transfer. She folded her blue dress carefully, smoothing the fabric before placing it inside. Each movement felt deliberate, not rushed. Margaret entered the dormitory once more before evening, pausing beside Anna's bed. "When you arrived," she said quietly, "you believed you could not touch clean things." Anna met her eyes steadily. "I was wrong," she replied. Margaret shook her head slightly. "You were taught something untrue. That is different." The distinction settled deeply. Anna considered it for a moment, then nodded. "I will remember," she said. Margaret offered a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "That is enough." When the bell rang for the evening meal, the dining hall felt both familiar and temporary. The radio played a gentle melody that seemed to stretch longer than usual. Anna carried her tray and took her seat, aware that this would be one of her last evenings in this room. She did not rush her meal. She listened to the quiet murmur of conversation, to the clink of enamel cups, to the steady breathing of those around her. After supper, she returned to the dormitory and lay back on her bed, the canvas bag resting at her feet. Through the open window, the Rhine moved steadily beneath the deepening blue of the sky. The river did not pause for transitions. It carried light across its surface and continued forward. Anna closed her eyes and felt no trace of the word that had once defined her. In its place stood something measured and chosen. She had stood in steam. She had spoken in a foreign language. She had written her name in graphite. Tomorrow she would step beyond these walls toward another chapter, carrying not shame but steadiness. And as sleep settled gently over the dormitory, the quiet truth remained, clear and unwavering. She did not raise her voice. She raised her standard. The 12th morning arrived before the sun had fully cleared the horizon, the dormitory still wrapped in a soft gray light that blurred the edges of iron beds and folded blankets. Anna woke at the first faint movement in the corridor, aware that this day would carry her beyond the brick walls that had quietly reshaped her. She did not rush to sit up. Instead, she listened to the low hum of early activity, the distant roll of a cart wheel, the murmur of a guard exchanging measured words with a clerk. The air felt cooler than the previous mornings, touched by a breeze moving in from the river. She reached beneath her pillow and drew out the notebook, holding it for a moment before opening to the page where her handwriting remained steady and clear. "We stand with dignity." The graphite lines did not waver. She traced them lightly with her fingertip, then closed the cover and placed it carefully into the small canvas bag at the foot of her bed. Across the aisle, Liesel was already awake, watching her with quiet understanding. No words were necessary. The bell rang once, its tone neither urgent nor ceremonial, simply marking another transition. In the dining hall, the light was pale and angled, casting long reflections across the wooden tables. The scent of coffee rose steadily, mingled with warm bread and the faint sweetness of fruit preserves. Anna stepped into line with calm posture, her bag resting lightly against her shoulder. When her bowl was filled, she nodded in acknowledgement, her voice steady as she said, "Thank you." The enlisted man returned the nod without hesitation. Margaret Collins entered shortly after, sleeves rolled as always, her expression composed. She paused near the doorway and scanned the room, her gaze resting briefly on Anna before moving on. There was no dramatic exchange, no lingering farewell, only recognition that something had shifted. After breakfast, the women gathered in the courtyard one last time. The sun had risen fully now, warming the bricks and illuminating the open space between the walls. The Rhine shimmered beyond the warehouse doors, its surface bright under the clear sky. A transport truck idled near the far gate, its engine a low, steady hum. The sergeant stood with a clipboard, reading names in measured tone. When he reached Anna Keller, she stepped forward without hesitation. The movement felt deliberate, chosen. Margaret approached with a small envelope containing transfer instructions and handed it to her without ceremony. "The facility near Cologne will receive you by late afternoon," she said evenly. "They will continue the process." Anna nodded. "I understand," she replied in clear English. The words carried neither fear nor eagerness, only steadiness. Liesel stepped forward and embraced her briefly, the gesture simple and unadorned. "You will see the river again," Liesel said softly in German. Anna smiled faintly. "It flows," she answered. Margaret extended her hand, not as authority, but as acknowledgement. Anna took it without hesitation. The contact was firm, unloved, steady. "You have practiced well," Margaret said quietly. Anna met her gaze. "You removed your gloves?" she replied. Margaret's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Yes," she said. "And you stood." The exchange required no further explanation. The truck door opened with a muted metallic sound. Anna stepped toward it, feeling the weight of the canvas bag against her shoulder and the solid ground beneath her feet. She paused briefly at the threshold and turned once more toward the courtyard, toward the chalkboard visible through the classroom window, where the large sheet of paper still hung with its simple sentences written in pencil. "We belong here today. We choose how we stand. We stand with dignity." The words remained where they had been placed, steady under the morning light. She did not wave. She did not dramatize departure. She simply inclined her head slightly toward Margaret and Liesel, then stepped into the truck. The engine's hum deepened as it began to move, tires rolling slowly across the gravel beyond the gate. Through the open back, she caught one final glimpse of the brick walls, the open courtyard, the thin line of river glinting beyond. The warehouse grew smaller in the distance, its shape receding but not erased. The road curved gently along the riverbank, the Rhine moving beside it in broad, patient arcs. Anna sat upright on the wooden bench inside the truck, her posture aligned, her hands resting calmly atop the canvas bag. Around her, two other women sat in. Similar silence, their gazes fixed forward. No one spoke for several miles. The countryside unfolded in muted greens and browns, fields interrupted by scattered houses and narrow roads. The war's shadow still lingered across the landscape, but the river moved steadily through it, unchanged in its direction. Anna withdrew the notebook from her bag and opened it to the final blank page. The truck's motion caused the pencil to tremble slightly in her hand, but she steadied it against her knee and wrote in careful English letters, "I stand where I am sent." The sentence was simple, unembellished. She closed the notebook and returned it to the bag, her gaze shifting once more to the river outside. As the truck continued toward Cologne, the morning light grew brighter, illuminating the water in shifting patterns of silver and blue. Anna felt no trace of the word that had once defined her. It had dissolved somewhere between steam and chalk dust, between the removal of gloves and the repetition of simple phrases. In its place remained something quieter and more durable. She did not need the walls of the warehouse to maintain it. She carried it with her, measured and intact. The truck rolled steadily along the river road, the engine's hum blending with the low, constant sound of water moving beside it. Anna's shoulders remained straight, her breathing even. She did not look back again. The river did not look back either. It flowed forward under open sky, carrying light across its surface without apology. And as the road curved toward the city ahead, Anna felt the same quiet current within her, steady and chosen, moving without hesitation into whatever waited beyond the next bend. The road narrowed as the truck approached the outskirts of Cologne, the skyline emerging in fragments through early afternoon light. Church spires rose against the sky, some scarred by time, others standing unchanged, their silhouettes steady above the river's bend. Anna remained seated upright on the wooden bench in the back of the transport, her canvas bag resting against her knees, the steady hum of the engine beneath her feet. The Rhine flowed beside the road as it had earlier, broad and patient, reflecting sunlight in long bands of silver. She watched it without urgency. The river did not hurry toward the city. It simply continued. As the truck crossed a narrow bridge, Anna caught sight of familiar stone embankments and rows of buildings that felt both distant and known. Cologne was not as she remembered it, yet it was not erased. Laundry lines stretched between windows. A baker's sign hung crooked but intact. A woman swept the front step of a small shop, her movements measured and calm. The truck turned into a courtyard enclosed by a large administrative building, now serving as a processing center for returning civilians and prisoners. The gate closed behind them with a muted clang, not dramatic, simply final. A uniformed clerk approached as the engine idled, clipboard in hand. Names were checked in steady tones. When Anna Keller was spoken, she stepped down from the truck without hesitation. Her shoes met the gravel with quiet certainty. The air carried the scent of stone warmed by afternoon sun and faint traces of river water drifting through the city streets. She adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder and followed the clerk toward the entrance. Inside, the building was orderly, its corridors lined with desks and benches, sunlight filtering through tall windows that cast long rectangles across polished floors. The space did not feel harsh. It felt transitional. A nurse at a registration table greeted each arrival with measured courtesy. When Anna reached the desk, the nurse looked up and met her eyes directly. "Name?" she asked in clear English. "Anna Keller," she replied without pause. The nurse recorded it neatly in a ledger and handed her a small identification card. "You will be directed to temporary housing," she said evenly. "Processing will continue over the next few days." Anna nodded. "I understand." The English came naturally now, not rehearsed. As she moved down the corridor toward the housing wing, she noticed the open windows along the hall, allowing fresh air to circulate. The city's distant sounds drifted inside. Footsteps on cobblestone, the faint ringing of a bicycle bell, a vendor calling out reduced prices. Ordinary sounds. They did not clash with the memory of the warehouse by the river. They blended. The assigned room held 4 narrow beds, each neatly made with white sheets and folded blankets. A small wooden table stood near the window. Anna placed her canvas bag on the nearest bed and sat down slowly, taking in the space. The walls were plain, painted a soft neutral color that reflected the afternoon light. She withdrew her notebook from the bag and set it on the table. The window overlooked a narrow street where 2 children walked beside an older woman, their pace unhurried. The sight did not overwhelm her. It grounded her. Later that evening, after a simple meal of bread and soup in the communal dining room, Anna returned to her small room and opened the notebook once more. She turned past the sentences she had written in the warehouse classroom and found a blank page. The city outside murmured gently through the open window. She held the pencil steady and wrote in careful English letters, "I am not what I was told." She paused, reading the lines slowly. The words felt neither defiant nor dramatic. They felt factual. She added another sentence beneath it. "I carry my dignity with me." The graphite lines pressed firmly into the paper. She closed the notebook and rested her hands lightly atop it, feeling the solid weight beneath her palms. The journey from the intake hall to this room had not erased history. It had not rewritten the war. It had simply reframed her place within it. She lay back against the pillow and listened to the city settling into evening. Somewhere beyond the buildings, the Rhine continued its steady course, the same river that had flowed beside the warehouse walls and along the transport road. It did not belong to one side or the other. It moved forward because that was its nature. In the days that followed, Anna would complete paperwork, receive instructions about returning home, and stand in lines that marked new beginnings. But in this moment, in the quiet of a room washed in fading light, she understood something simple and unshakable. No one had restored her by force. No one had spoken over her. A pair of gloves had been removed. A sentence had been written on a chalkboard. A letter had arrived describing flowers growing in a window box. These small acts had shifted the ground beneath her feet more surely than any command. She turned her head toward the window and watched the sky deepen from pale gold to blue. The city lights flickered on one by one, small points against the evening. Anna closed her eyes not in exhaustion but in quiet acknowledgement. She did not need the courtyard walls or the chalkboard or the steady presence of Margaret Collins to remain aligned. The lesson had taken root. She had stood. She had spoken. She had written her own name without apology. And as the river flowed unseen through the city beyond, carrying light and shadow alike, she breathed evenly, knowing that dignity did not require permission. It required choice. She had chosen, and that choice would travel with her long after the transport trucks and brick walls faded into memory.